I would also invite folks that when you do have a time, we invite you to mcc.gov and look at all of our programs, in particular water, but we have a variety of other programs in our $5.5 billion worth of commitments worldwide in 16 compacts. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel. First, we'll hear from MCC's Senior Country Director, Stephen Gall, who led the team that signed the $507 million compact with Mozambique. And in particular today, we're going to talk about the MCC investment in Mozambique in water, both from an MCC point of view, but also from a World Bank point of view, which I'll explain in a moment. Stephen also led the team that signed the Cape Verde $110 million MCC compact. So you got two compacts under your belt, huh? Okay, so he's been involved in finance and development since 1988, covering Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Prior to joining MCC, he was managing director at Aegis Capital Corporation, a startup merchant bank business development company, and Stephen has worked for Bechtel Enterprises in the past as well. And he started his career at the World Bank, International Finance Corporation. And today, Stephen will share a few more details about specific programs that we have in Mozambique on water. I would also like to introduce Jamil Sagir from the World Bank. Mr. Sagir joined the World Bank in 1990 and is the Director of Energy, Transport, and Water. So we have the right guy here, don't we? Okay. He is the chair of the Energy and Mining Sector Board, the Transport Sector Board, and the Water Sector Board. What do you do in your spare time? But before his current portfolio of managing the energy, transport, and water sectors bank-wide, Mr. Sagir worked in various aspects of the private sector development. Mr. Sagir will talk more about the donor coordination aspect of our work in Mozambique. Again, after their presentations, we will go ahead and take questions. I'll moderate and then step aside for those who want to ask questions here at the microphone. And also I should add that the questions will not only be for our two panelists, but if there's a particular question for Rodney Bent or Malcolm Morris, they'll be available to take that as well since they're still here. Stephen.
Thank you, Matt, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here with you today. I'd like also to especially recognize a colleague of mine from the World Bank, Jane Walker, who was instrumental in allowing us to be successful as well. So, Jane, thank you to you. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about MCC's water and sanitation investments in Mozambique. They're part of a $507 million compact with the country that also includes funding for land, administration, agriculture, and roads. The water and sanitation investments in Mozambique total $203 million, or roughly 40% of MCC's overall clean water and sanitation portfolio. They're designed to remove important constraints to growth in Mozambique that include inadequate infrastructure, limited human capacity, and poor health. These investments, together with $36 million in complementary funding from the World Bank Group, will increase access to safe, reliable water supply and sanitation services. They are expected to reach more than 2 million people, particularly women and girls, who can spend hours every day fetching water, thereby leaving them more time for income-earning opportunities and to attend school. And they will help reduce waterborne diseases, one of the leading causes of death in children under 5. The MCC program builds off the government's pioneering work begun in the 1990s and funded by the World Bank to put in place the key sectoral institutions and regulatory frameworks to attract private sector involvement in construction, operations, and maintenance of water systems. Since emerging in 1992 from nearly 3 years of devastating conflict, Mozambique has experienced one of the fastest growth rates in Africa, averaging 8% per year over the last decade. Nevertheless, half of the country's population of 20 million still lives in poverty. Given the country's rapid urbanization, its next stage of economic growth cannot succeed without well-functioning public services in its cities, where coverage levels for water and sanitation are declining. Ranked 168 out of 176 countries on the Human Development Index, Mozambique has recognized that poor access to water and sanitation is a major barrier to growth and health. Indeed, Mozambique has one of the lowest levels of per capita water consumption in the world. With an average of less than 10 liters per day, the country is, in fact, far below the global benchmarks that Rodney Bent mentioned earlier. As a result, the government identified water and sanitation as a major policy priority in its poverty reduction and economic growth strategy. Together, these factors provided the underpinning for the government's proposal to MCC, to which I shall now turn. MCC began working in earnest with the government of Mozambique in July 2005 after it submitted a request for funding for an ambitious program focused in Mozambique's 4 northern provinces. The July 2005 proposal was conceptual in nature, however, because of scant existing project preparation work. Therefore, MCC provided the government with some pre-compact grant funding to allow the government to conduct some pre-feasibility studies. This, in turn, allowed the government to finalize its proposal in a short 2-year period of intensive program preparation. This pre-compact support culminated in a multi-donor funding package totaling nearly $240 million, which was made possible by the collaborative efforts of MCC, the World Bank, the Africa Catalytic Growth Fund, and the Global Partnership on Output-Based Aid. We'll hear more about the collaboration with the World Group Bank shortly. In Mozambique, the Compact's water supply and interventions are designed to increase system capacity by improving raw water intakes, transmission systems, treatment works, distribution and storage systems, and household connections. To complement the enhanced water supply, the MCC investments will also improve sanitation systems by expanding wastewater treatment, improving piped sewage network, and increasing the usage of septic systems in urban centers and latrines in peri-urban areas. In addition, storm drains will be rehabilitated and expanded to improve drainage efficiency. For rural water supply, the MCC program involves construction and rehabilitation of rural water points in 600 villages. Does that mean my time is up? The proposal sought to consolidate and advance the government's overall water sector strategy, which seeks to involve private sector participation to reduce operating costs and improve service. These factors are key to system sustainability. In urban water supply, the government's so-called delegated management strategy is predicated on a separation of asset ownership and operations and maintenance, whereby the state owns the water assets, operations and maintenance is carried out by the private sector, and an independent regulatory authority sets service standards and regulates tariffs. The government's proposal to MCC also addressed 2 key neglected market segments: small-town water supply and sanitation. However, these particular areas presented major challenges in terms of sustainable service delivery. Therefore, to address the government's proposal, MCC formed a strategic partnership with the World Bank Group designed to leverage each institution's respective comparative advantage to put in place sustainable solutions designed to benefit potentially millions of people in Mozambique. A focal point of the partnership was to merge MCC's large amount of potential grant funding, which is particularly suited for large-scale capital investments, with the bank's institutional and policy knowledge. A central objective of the program was to deepen private sector participation in the sector. Under the government's existing delegated management model, several private operators are already participating in the water service delivery, covering around 14 cities through various private sector modalities. Under contract with a state-owned asset holding company called FIPAG, a private international company already operates Maputo under a 12-year lease agreement. It also operates 4 northern provincial capital cities under a separate management contract. In the southern part of the country, 4 smaller cities are packaged together and served by another international private operator. It was through the good work of people like Jane and her colleagues at the World Bank that made all of that possible and that we leveraged off of. Under the multi-donor funding program, a new similar sort of institutional model called the Asset Management Unit, to be housed in the National Water Agency, is going to be rolled out, focusing initially on 5 small to mid-sized towns and cities. The Asset Management Unit will have responsibility for sanitation as well as water supply. One of the main goals of the government's delegated management framework is to achieve sustainability by improving the financial viability and efficiency of service providers. This entails reducing the dependence on government subsidies and increasing reliance on tariffs from customers as the main source of internally generated financing. As part of the transformation of the urban water sector, it is expected that the new multi-donor funding package will help move the existing management contracts to leases while expanding the scope of private participation to include urban areas currently operated by state-owned or municipally owned service providers. Eventually, it is hoped that the existing service providers can gain financial autonomy to tap other sources of funding from international and domestic financiers in the capital markets. In this way, the Mozambique program could become a deliverable under the commitments made at the 2003 G8 summit in Evian, as referred to at the start of today's program. In terms of progress to date, the government, supported by MCC and the World Bank, is beginning to advance on the key institutional developments and policy reforms. These will be followed by the civil works during the Compact's 5-year program execution period. The expected outcome of this multi-donor investment program would be to greatly strengthen the country's key existing water and sanitation institutions, to create new sector institutions, and put in place the mechanism for greater system sustainability by deepening private sector participation in service provision. We expect that this collaboration will provide a useful platform for ongoing coordination and alignment between the government and its development partners, and should facilitate the scaling up of future aid to the sector. Now I'll turn it over to Jamal Sagir to describe this collaboration from the perspective of the World Bank Group and how the Bank, too, is supporting the government of Mozambique.
Thanks, Stevens. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the World Bank, we are extremely happy to be here and share some of our thoughts with you. I will focus on Mozambique, but first I would like to come back on the big picture, because the way Rodney and Malcolm put it so rightly in the Congressman, that I would like to give a perspective from us, since we are the biggest financier of water supply and sanitation in the developing country, and I thought it would be useful also to complement this comment. I would be extremely concerned in the next 10 to 15 years from one aspect that has not been yet enough discussed that will have an impact on the water supply and the achievement that we have done so far, which is the impact of climate change on water scarcity, water stress, and the fluctuation and the impact it will have on the existing assets, and how we're going to adapt to more flood, more drought, worse quality, and how quickly we'll be able to redesign the systems to supply a world which will be more urbanized, more poor in some areas. And that's an important aspect for the water supply to keep in mind as we think about it. It's the link between climate change and the water sector. We always talk about the link between climate change, energy sector, and the power sector in particular. We don't focus enough on the ticking bomb, which is the water supply systems, that we need to talk about it. Keeping this in mind, I think what I would like, the figures that were given this morning were extremely interesting. 1 out of 6 of the population basically don't have access to any water supply, and 40% don't have access to any basic sanitation. We're not talking about more sanitation, we're talking about the basic sanitation. This is definitely bad news, but I would like us to be also a bit more optimistic also. In the last 20 years, more than 2 billion people in the developing country have gained access to water supply, and 600 million people have access to sanitation. We have never seen such quick access in the past. So we have a little bit to be optimistic that we can do it, and in some places it went quicker than we thought. If we have to meet the MDGs, we talk about 1.5 billion people will have to have access, and about 2 billion people will have to have access to sanitation. We didn't talk about how much it cost, and I need to give you the figures. It will cost us $30 billion additional, $30 billion per year of investment if we have to meet the MDGs of water supply and sanitation. This is doubling from the current investment of $15 billion per year. worldwide. And we need to keep this figure in mind. And I'm talking only about water supply and sanitation. If we have to do infrastructure for the water sector and continue to growing, we've talked about $180 billion from the hydropower sectors to the water management to the irrigation sectors. But if we focus on our sector today, we talk about $30 billion. So where we stand on meeting the MDGs, we are late. In Africa in particular, we're even more late than people thought. If we look right now, according to the latest 2006 Joint Monitoring Program, which is WHO, UNICEF figures, only 60% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa have access. And these are the lowest figures for any of the world region. We should be concerned about South Asia, where if you look in terms of numbers, you have 400 million people in India don't have access to water. In Africa, we talk about 500 million. But India is investing $1 billion per year and is moving. Where in Africa, we have some stagnation. In some places, we are going back. Based on the trend that we have seen of connection, of investment, of donors' commitment, it seems that 44% of the sub-Saharan Africa countries are not on track to meet the MDGs in water, and 85% of sub-Saharan countries are not on track to meet the MDGs in sanitation. It's estimated that an additional 24 million people would need to be served each year to meet these MDGs. On the current trend of investment, commitment, sub-Saharan Africa will only reach the MDGs of water in 2040 and sanitation in 2070. So we have a problem. We have a much more serious problem than we think, actually. So the declarations are good, but the investment are completely lagging. We talked about the figures about how many people are dying, and this is the 1.7 million deaths a year, and 90% of children. What's interesting is in sub-Saharan Africa, which contain only 11% of the world population, bear 40% of the burden of the disease. And that's what we have to keep in mind. If you have 11% of the population, you have 40% of the disease. That means any leverage of movement, you are always tracked back by one factor against the other factor. If I focus on the investment that are needed in Africa compared to the 30 billion that I gave you worldwide, we have recently estimated from the World Bank, for water, we talk about $6 billion a year. And for sanitation, $6.5 billion a year. So a total of $6.5 billion a year. What's being invested right now is $2 billion a year. It's around $4 billion a year, I would say. I will need to go from 4 to 6. Out of the 4 billion that are invested right now, the World Bank is the biggest. We have 2 billion. So we need also to figure out why investment are not being attracted as it should be in a sector which is so vital for economic growth, for poverty alleviation. And one of my concerns, because I handle all the infrastructure, this sector is moving from the radar screen of the global agendas. And we from the World Bank were pushing it hard, including for this coming G8. I was in Tokyo last week, and I have a discussing with the Japanese government to ensure that the follow-up of the Evian will be followed up properly in this G8 of Japan or next year. So we talk about $10 billion that we need here. And we talk about basically 1.3% of GDP investment on average in sub-Saharan Africa. That's a lot of money. When you have the countries we have at the same time, 1.6 billion people don't have access to any form of electricity. When you have 1.2 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have access also to all-weather road. So we are a competing agenda, which is basically the access agenda, the basic agenda. Access to water, access to energy service, access to infrastructure. And I think in this context that we have to put this agenda. So no doubt what we have seen, the challenge is enormous, and if we have to do a lot of work, therefore, it's very important to create a donors platform for coordinated assistance. It's only through leveraging and creating a platform of coordinated donor support and by steering the government-owned public and private investment toward identified needs that country can meet the challenge. Most of the time, we define the leverage of the public versus the private. We have not been doing enough on leveraging donors to donors. And I think what we have been doing in this example, in our close collaboration with MCC, is this kind of leveraging. We need to redefine the notion of leveraging. If the World Bank put $1 10 years ago, how much it leveraged you to come and give you the comfort letter for you to invest. And people don't always look at the historical investment that prepare the future investment. My job is scouting. We are when nobody's there. And that's part of the thing that the World Bank, people don't know about it. The bank in 1965 financed the Tokyo water utility. If you look at the appraisal report, at that time the condition was cost recovery. The government of Japan didn't want to go with full cost recovery. We delayed negotiation for 1 year. 1966, the loan was approved. Tokyo water utility. I'm not going to give you the example of the city of Paris, that we financed also some of the housing as well as the water issues. So what I'm trying to say, there are basic investment, and the case here is fantastic to show it, how we lay down the ground, we pick up the basic issues, we put the regulation in place, we carry out the policy framework, we build the confidence, and then we bring other donors to leverage us. And we stay. And that's another thing which is very important. We don't walk away once you leverage. And that's another aspect that's important. You don't walk away from a good deal thinking somebody else will carry it out, because the deal may get out. So I think the example here, what we have, is a perfect storm for donor collaboration, which enabled Mozambique, which has a per capita GDP of $310, by the way, I think it's very important, to achieve this part of these MDGs. So we have worked for 10 years before anybody showed up. We have done a lot of preparatory work. I was involved myself in 2001, where at that time, it was a break completely of what was happening. This was a country where we were getting outside the civil war, start getting some confidence. Private operator was operating, but not under optimal condition. And the private sector decided to leave in the middle of the project. We had to step in as a World Bank to rebuild confidence, bring back a private sector, another one, continue working hard so that the management contract and the water supply is not discontinuing. One of the aspects which is very important, that's why the fund of the IDA Association, where we have also to thank the Congress for the appropriation that is coming for us. IDA money is important. Why? Because of the quality that we can put on the quality of the water. If the case that you have showed early on was extremely important to say that one person died and suddenly you have. One of my concerns of any IDA money in Africa is ensure that the chlorine is there. First issue on the policy dialogue. And this is an interesting aspect that most of the people forget about the basic. And therefore, I think what we have done together here, we proposed policy reform, we brought the knowledge, the lesson learned, the practical and project experience, working with a project started in mid-1990, the National Development Project 1 and 2, that covered most of the aspect of the water sector, water resource, urban water supply, plus a considerable amount of policy in capacity building and hands-on support. People like Jane, they spend their time doing capacity building. Capacity building is not in the project life. It's not a project life of 5 years, and I do capacity building for 5 years. It's long term. What you invest right now, you get the result of the capacity building in 10 years. That's something else important that we learned in the World Bank. We have not been patient enough to wait to see the result. I've been in the World Bank for 18 years. Project I did it in Nigeria or in Cote d'Ivoire in 1990. Recently, I see some people coming to see me to thank me. I forgot about the project, about the impact, but I realized suddenly that this has sorted out subsectors out of poverty because we have not been patient to wait. Some project will take time, and that's the Mozambique example, where 10 years of investment for us was an important period. In these 10 years, we put $130 million of IDA resources. And that's allowed you to come right now and give you a little bit more comfort. So we work, as I said, on regulation and reform. We worked on, with the Africa Catalytic Growth Fund, which made a critical contribution to the IDA package by helping to crowd in and leverage fund to enhance the work and the bank. We work on the IDA HGF fund, which was effective mid-March, in the project called WASIS. We work also with a global partnership on output-based aid, providing up to 30,000 connections to low-income countries, where basically you say to the private sector, I will pay you if you connect. In other words, I subsidize the output, not the input, because we are sick and tired of seeing water pipes sitting at the port and nobody installed them. With the meters, the same thing. But if you come to the private sector and say, I pay you if you install in a period of time 20,000 connections on the output, they will do it, rather than importing the pipes. And that's what another aspect that we have been doing also in the case of Mozambique. Because the time frame of the MCC investment is around 5 years, while our IDA support is given on an ongoing basis, the water support service institutional support project will include all aspects of institutional reform to support the management of smaller water supply system, which may take longer to implement, while the MCC will provide capital funding for some of these investments. This is where the plastic surgeon has to come. You come at a certain time, you fix a problem. I am there to ensure that the problem doesn't come back. But we might need you again with your surgeon. And that's where it comes much more seriously when we have to do this work. So the model of infrastructure support has clearly changed to a multi-donor concept. And the multi-donors concept, like when we talk about multi-trust fund concept, is something that we have to work much more and define it among ourselves. That's the Paris harmonization strategy. And we've seen much more than collaboration. Collaboration is not only about goodwill and sitting in the same room. It's about really taking the comparative advantage and bringing the other players. And looking ahead, the bank look forward to work in strong collaboration with the MCC. We see a clear demand for MCC support across the continent, in Africa and somewhere else. And we look forward to continuing close cooperation, because I think the challenge of Africa is an important challenge. The challenge of the water supply and sanitation in Africa is for the next 50 years at least, and we have to be honest. We have to be patient. We have to investment in a human capacity, as well as in policy reform regulation, is for me more important than the money. Because if we put the money too quickly without having the policy reform in place, it will go too quickly and you don't see any impact. It becomes like the unaccounted for water. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and also Jamal, for your remarks. I particularly appreciate the remarks there at the end about, especially here on the Hill, about being patient for results. We know our investments are long-term, and we have a lot going on, and we ask for patience with results. But let me just start off with a question quickly. We only have about 11 minutes for questions. But let me start off. You talked a little bit about what seemed to be some unique coordination on the ground between the World Bank, MCC, and some others. But maybe I can start out with Stephen and maybe Jamal if you have some comments. If you could talk about not the top level collaboration, but what it meant on the operational level, the nuts and bolts, and does this serve as a potential platform for cooperation on some other projects?
I guess it's a little bit sort of like making the sausage. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work at the operational level. I mean, for the reasons that Jamal was describing, the basic fundamentals were in place. In other words, when the government came to us and said, can you work on water and sanitation, when I surveyed what the World Bank had supported the government with, I knew that the conditions were fertile for us to be able to come in and operate for all of the reasons that Jamal described. I mean, basically it came out of, I think, a good experience that we had at the sort of joint staff level working on an operation in Cape Verde. That was sort of the starting point. I used to work at the World Bank, so I knew what type of documents to look for as well. I started with the World Bank's what they call ESW, Economic and Sector Work, and contacted Jane Walker, who was the task manager for National Water 1 and 2 projects, and got access to some of that operational work that they had worked on, and just started a dialogue. I even attended a World Bank country team offsite in Annapolis at one point, just to get to know some more people and explain how MCC works and just throw some ideas around. one idea that came out of that was to proposing a joint parallel funding operation, which ultimately came to be called the Water Services and Institutional Support Project, which is the parallel funding operation. So it sort of grew out of that, and then in turn, we started talking about a possibility of Africa Catalytic Fund, which is a trust fund managed by the World Bank, and out of that, Global Partnership for Outputs-Based Aid. So, one thing led to another, and then there was the World Bank was flexible, adjusted its country assistance strategy to incorporate a new water project that wasn't in the mix originally, and MCC was asked to be a peer reviewer to that process. So basically, it was just a lot of just, mundane, day-to-day coordination, thinking strategically about each institution's comparative advantage, and then sort of getting aligned Paris Declaration compliant to, align our interventions with the objectives of the government, and then, carrying out joint appraisal, and we've actually agreed to do joint supervision missions in the future. As a matter of fact, we even used the same consultants for some of our respective project preparation work. We're very fortunate to have, I think, terrific work by one Thelma Trish, who I invited. I don't see her in the audience. But Thelma worked on our project and then on the World Bank project, so to ensure coordination and continuity. So that's basically how it came about. In terms of, is it a platform for future coordination? Yeah, I think Jamal spoke to that. I understand that the African Development Bank is looking at the asset management unit to which I referred to fund some cities. So it's I think that platform is ripe for scaling up now, in the same way that we had sort of modeled this institutional mechanism off of the work of the World Bank through FIPAG in the 1990s.
I can add a bit. The way we function actually is very important. The economic sector work, which is basically what we call the analytical work, which is the basic before we do any loans or when we start the policy dialogue. The latest one we have done in Mozambique is 2005, for instance, which is an interesting one called the role of water in the Mozambique economy. And one striking conclusion, which any economist or any politician or any investors will look at it and say, my God, we better have this country. Based on what we see in terms of water shock that happened between 1981 and 2004, and this water shock happened in Mozambique every 5 years. Every time they are hit by a flood, by a drought, which is start cutting more and more, 6% of GDP is gone. And they have been trying hard to go on 8% for the last 10 years to catch up. So when you think about this kind of stress that come on this economy, and out of the 6%, 1.1 are due to water supply. You stop supplying people. So this kind of work first provide for the other donors enough comfort to explain why working in Mozambique with the World Bank, not working in Benin, or not enough working in Benin. So I think that's an important aspect. The second aspect is that what we have been doing here also, in a country under very difficult situation, you were able to attract a private operator to come and take risk. If the private operator came and took risk in the case of Maputo in the northern areas, the bank gave its balance sheet, if you want, or its comfort that we're going to stick if something happens. And this also built confidence in local operator, which also allow you, when you put your investment, you know they're going to get a good return. So there is also the business case which is being discussed, which has to be also put in perspective, in my view. The third thing, our institution bring to the table is the intellectual leadership at the end of the day. This is the World Bank. If you look at the 10,000 employees, we have 5,000 PhDs. I always call the World Bank, it's the only university in the world that lend money at the end of the day. So which is the advantage of having broad-based innovative approaches to look at how you blend public-private money, how you tackle small town versus great town. The middle town, right now, for instance, when we talk about the small town in Mozambique, when I compare to a small town in China, it's 2 million people, or in India, 3 million people. And these are the future headache, because they are between the very small, the conglomerate, and they are in the middle size where the poverty is being created because people cannot go to the big cities because of the peri-urban poverty being created. They cannot stay in their communities because there are no opportunities. So this small town, if you don't provide services very quickly and have the foundation, we cannot succeed. And therefore, what's very interesting here, when we start scouting and mapping by saying, don't focus too much on this area, go to secondary city. And we have seen right now a lot of the bilateral donors going to secondary city, to small cities, where some of the biggest continue in the big cities. And that's an interesting role of traffic controllers as well. But to understand the traffic controller, you need a lot of simulation. I think that's what we bring to the table as well. So the knowledge that we built is at the disposal. Our appraisal document, I think in this case we have done joint appraisal. We will do joint supervision of the project. And we put a lot of money in our appraisal. Any appraisal of any project is around $300,000 project preparation. And supervision is around $100,000 a year, between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. We have 3 missions that go every 3 months and help the government because the policy dialogue. And therefore, in between the interesting part of the collaboration, we continue to provide you the input. It's not like one shot, where here the deal, take it, leverage you, thank you very much. And that's why the role of the MCC also in sustainable development, as you said it in the beginning, is very important in the way we design the future of this project. Thank you.
Our time is running away from us, but I do want to get to a couple of questions from the audience. If you go ahead.
I'm Yafik from American University. Actually, my question is very simple. That after listening to Dr. Sarir, who is well noted in this area, and I worked on water project in MENA for about 20 years. It is very fine and it's very nice to provide water, but my concern always is how we are going to leave these agencies in charge of providing water, and they will maintain sustainability through a proper tariff system. As far as I'm concerned, my experience in all these countries, from Mauritania to Oman, we are doing a poor job in assigning a proper tariff for that precious resource. So I hope MCC is paying more attention to that particular fact, because even though one more figure that we use only 8% of the water available on planet Earth, but we are still abusing that resource through a very poor tariff system.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very good question. In the case of Mozambique, we are, well, first of all, the groundwork was put in place by the World Bank to have an institution called CRA, which is the Water Regulatory Authority, which is probably the strongest water sector institution in Mozambique. The folks there are terrific. Our program requires that there's O&M cost recovery, full O&M cost recovery. We're not expecting to recover capital costs. And we work with our partners in the World Bank. This is the joint supervision, keeping the client's toes to the fire in that respect. I'm not an expert in this area. I figured what I could best do to solve that nut, to crack that nut of sustainability, is to get our partners from the World Bank involved, because that's where the experience resides. She's the best person right here.
I think the question is very fair. Let's unbundle it. if you talk about the sanitation, until a few years ago, a lot of European countries and a lot of states and communities here subsidize sanitation. So we shouldn't run away from the word subsidy either. The question is what kind of smart subsidy and how you target it to the place that need it. And this was one of the problems. We never designed subsidies that go to the right people. In the case of the water supply, I think minimum you have to cover operation and maintenance. But even that is tough in many MENA countries. I was the manager of the water sector in the MENA region of the World Bank. It's extremely tough. When you are in such scarcity, if you want as an economist to say, I will only send the signal. Here, if you look at the figures in Africa, Mozambique, consumption per capita, you know how much is it? The United States, you mentioned 600 liters. I thought it was 400. Now I'm more concerned. Mozambique is 10 liters per capita per day. To survive an average, you need 5 liters. If not, you die. So already with my 10 liters per capita per day, how much you're going to charge and how far you're going to go. So they have been really efficient. So what kind of efficiency you're going to work on? And therefore, how gradually you go on delivering the service, putting the consumption, subsidizing the meters. The meter costs $75 to install it. Here in the United States, it's in your bill. You don't see it. Somebody come and the WSSC put it and check it. $75 when you buy it, unless you buy the Chinese one for $20, that will not last as long as you should be. How do you do with that? So there are all issues that if you subsidize the meter, you already cut on it. Then and that's where we have to unbundle the financial aspect of the utility and the service. Thank you.
And we're using the Global Partnership on Outputs-Based Aid to help do that.
If you can come.
You know, there's a lot of difference in big projects and little projects and so forth, but just to make a comment, some of the costs that we hear bandied about in all the meetings that you and I and others go to are so terrific and so tremendous that sometimes the world just wants to step back and say we can't do it. And we can do it. The cost is not that great. What I have seen factored in the cost of doing these projects is that maintenance program. And what we are so careful to do in the Alliance is work at the community level. We call it a bottoms-up approach. And at the community level, we decide with that community what they can sustain, what they will maintain. And we talk about how many, if they're going to be a part of that project, whatever's going to wear out, we're going to have them selling enough cows, chickens, goats, whatever it is, to pay for what will wear out. And that way they know concretely what that cost will be and what their obligations are. We have an example of a well at Larajet where there are now 30,000 people relying on one well. All government wells gone. This is a living water well. There is not anybody who is not Kenyan supporting that project. It was done in 1997. And in Larajet, they're maintaining the generator, changing the oil in it, going and getting the fuel, charging the people who come to the water site to leave an animal, whatever it is. They've got a charge account set up to feed a station. They run in with jerry cans, get on the bus, go get it, fill up, come back, change the oil every day. And 30,000 people are literally being kept alive within life walk off of one well. Sustainability in the planning of projects is extremely critical, and it has to be no technology beyond what that community can and will sustain and support. And I think we have seen in cases, I'll try not to mention the countries if I can, the World Bank has been involved with, where they tried to start at the top and nobody got any water to drink. And with World Bank, so we need a bottoms-up approach. And that's what we're preaching as well. And I think you saw South Africa has gone to a bottoms-up approach and said, okay, can't do it that way. The Kenyan government has said, we're going to start contracting out, and they've cut their cost of providing water into 1/4. So those are some key points, but I want to leave you with one further. In Houston, Texas, I don't know what you pay in Washington, D.C., I pay 1/10 of a cent per gallon for my water. The best price I see is near 1 penny in Africa. And if you want it delivered by donkey, it may be 10 cents. So somebody living on $2 a day could be paying anywhere from 10 to 100 times what I pay for water in Houston, Texas, and they're living on $2 a day. So it's very, very important. Sustainability, match the project to the people, be it a big city or a small place. Thank you.
Well, that is Houston water, though. Well, our time is over. I apologize. We didn't have a ton of time for Q&As, but I think we have to be respectful of the Capitol and for their generosity in letting us use their room. It's been a very, very rich discussion today. I will point out that at I will point out that there is a special water page on the MCC website, mcc.gov, specific to our conversation today. It'll be up today and for the next few days if you'd like to learn more. And sincerely, we really appreciate your participation today. See, we got to hurry. To MCC, but also more particularly to the water issue in general. And we'd like to thank our guests as well, and thank you for coming today.